In 1917, when landscape artist Tom Thomson disappeared, the search for him fell to a person already present, responsible and accountable to the government. That person was Mark Robinson. Robinson served Algonquin Park for decades as a ranger, acting superintendent, and chief ranger. He was intimately familiar with the lake country, the people at Canoe Lake, and knew Tom Thomson personally. When Tom Thomson's overturned canoe was found, the search commenced and the body surfaced. Robinson became, in practice, the government's point person on what passed for an investigation. Robinson never accepted that Thomson's death was an accident. The following is an account of how Robinson met Thomson and what transpired after his disappearance, as recorded in 1955 by Taylor Staton. The voice you will hear is that of Mark Robinson himself.
I was detailed to watch Joe Lake Station and Canoe Lake Station. We were to take the names of such persons as got off at the stations, find out their destination, the time they would spend within the park, and also what they were going to be their work or what they were going to do at this time in regard to whatever they were, artists or doctors or tourists or such. We would find that out and assist them in every way we could. And also, if it became necessary, search their packs to find if there was any such things as trappers. One evening, as I went to Canoe Lake, a couple of rangers had joined me, and we went down to Canoe Lake, and as the train came in, a tall, fine-looking young man with a backpack on his back stepped off the train. I went over to him and tried to explain to him as nicely as I could just what we required from him, his name and address and probable destination, and his work within the park. His prompt answer was Tom Thomson. The other questions I'd asked, he answered them very nicely and politely. He inquired then that he'd like to find a place to stay and where he could get a good bed and good eats, as he called it. Well, I explained to him that the Algonquin Hotel was a short distance away, about a quarter of a mile, and also that there was at Mowat Lodge, about a mile and a half distance, there was a man by the name of Fraser at a stopping place known as Mowat Lodge, where he could get good meals and excellent beds. And I said, Mr. Fraser's right here, I will introduce him to you. I did, and Mr. Fraser said, well, we think we can make room for you. We're pretty well filled, but we'll try and provide some room for you someplace. Fact of the matter was, Mr. Fraser had two guests, and Tom loaded up his stuff into Mr. Fraser's wagon, and he went down with him to his home. I went up in the morning and received instructions to proceed to Source Lake up the railroad to see some wood that had been cut and piled out there, to see if the ranger that was there was looking after it right. I looked over the wood and returned with the section foreman on his car back down to Joe Lake. This was on a Sunday. And in time, had our lunch, and while I was preparing it, I noticed Tom going up with Mrs. and Mr. Coulson up to their hotel. He had a cup of tea with them, and after a while I saw Shalon Fraser along the other side of the river from my cabin, and Tom came down almost at the same time from the Coulsons. He seemed to be carrying, I thought, a fishing rod or something. I wasn't sure of it, but the two of them came down to Joe Lake Dam. I was standing watching them. I took my glasses out to see if Tom was going to have a try for the trout, and he was pointing out something to Mr. Fraser, and I made up my mind Tom's going to have a try for the trout, and I guess he'd get it this time. I ran down the shore, up my path up my side, and I sat down, looking down on the two fellows down below me. Tom, casting, presently got the trout on, and it played. I thought he was going to land it, but it got away. He sort of smiled and said, well, Shalon, he said, I guess I'll go down to T Lake Dam or to West Lake or to Gills Lake, and I'll catch a big trout, and I'll bring it home, and I'll put it on Mark's doorstep. He'll think I've got the fish. And I was right above him looking at them. Well, Tom hadn't seen me. I sat still, and as they went up on the bank and turned, Tom looked back, and I waved to him. Howdy, he says. That's the last time Tom Thomson spoke to me. From the evidence that was given at the inquest, he had gone down to this little cottage up here, what used to be known as the manse, now Mr. Trainer's. He'd come down there and got his canoe and his fishing tackle and was going away to catch fish. And Mr. Fraser was to go up to the Mowat Lodge and bring him down a loaf of bread and an extra supply of bacon. he did so and put it in the front of the canoe and took a rubber sheet, kind of wrapped around, and then covered it all in with that. I may say that was still found in his canoe when the canoe was found, and just as Mr. Fraser had placed it. He left there at 1:30 by Mr. Fraser's evidence, and several people that was stopping at Mowat Lodge assured me that that was about the time as they saw Mr. Thomson leave the place. A while later, Miss Fletcher and her brother had passed going down the lake and saw the canoe upside down in the water. They didn't turn the canoe up. They said they just went on and left it there, and when they returned, the canoe had drifted in someplace. They said it was 5 minutes after 3. That's what they gave in their evidence. There was something fishy. However, it went on, and the next morning, Charlie Scrim came to my place, tears running down his cheeks here. The little tear would trickle down once in a while. "Mark," he says, "they found Tom Thomson's canoe, and it's floating upside down, just in back here, back a little wop here, in there again the shore. Now, the water was not near as high as it is now, and how that canoe got in there, in the condition it was, I'll never know. Or anybody else, I guess. However, in the Algonquin story, it tells you the canoe was floating right side up. That's absolutely false. I'm the man that took that canoe and turned it over and examined what was in the canoe. There was none of his equipment in it. His little axe even was gone, and the paddles were tied in for carrying. The paddle that he used in paddling was not there. I reported to Mr. Bartlett, and he instructed me to go into the woods and see if I could find Thomson. I traveled every day that week in this wood down to the south of us and west of the lake. I covered all that country as much as I could, my oldest boy and I found no trace of him. Couldn't find where his track even led to Gill Lake. At night, I'd return home each night, and I reported to Mr. Bartlett, and he sent 3 or 4 other rangers, and they traveled the east side of the lake here and the south side, and some of the lake lower down towards T Lake Dam. Found no trace of him. Saturday night, I'd returned late, and he said, "Look, Mark," he says, "you must be tired traveling so much." I said, "I am," but I said, "I could still travel more." I said, "I'd like to find Thomson." I said, "He must have broken a limb or fallen someplace and injured himself." But I said, "I've walked all over the bush." I said, "I've fired shots and I've blown my whistle." And I said, "He knows my signal with the whistle as well as anyone does." And I said, "I cannot find a trace of him." "Take a rest tomorrow," he said. Well, I did rest on Sunday, preparing to go out, determined to find him on Monday. Early Monday morning, Charlie Scrim come walking to the door, tears running down his cheeks. "Mark," he says, "they found Tom's body." He said Dr. Holland had been sitting out the front door and saw something rise in the water. And Lowry Dixon and George Rose were paddling down the lake, and he called to them to come over this way and see what this was that came up. Old George said it's so-and-so kind of a loon, and, the doctor said, "I wish you would look at it." Paddled over, and George shouts back, "It's Thompson's body." And they asked what he'd do with it. He said, "Have you a rope?" They said they had. "Well, just take his body over to the shore and tie it to a tree there out in the water." And he said, "Then report to the authorities." And then, of course, Charlie Scrim come up and reported to me, and I reported to Mr. Bartlett at once, and he placed me in charge of the case altogether then. He says, "You'll have to handle it for the government." Well, I didn't have the chance to handle it myself. If I had, there'd been more done about it. And Mr. Bartlett told me, he said, "I'll phone the coroner at once and have him come at once. Don't touch that body until the coroner comes." All that day, Tom's body lay in the water. That night, the next day, and the next night. Well, he was my friend, and that was getting under the skin pretty badly. And I called the superintendent in the morning, and I said, "Look, Mr. Bartlett, Thompson was my friend, and I hate to think of him lying there." I said, "It's not right." "I agree with you." He says, "Go right down, take that body out the water, and have the undertakers fix it up as well as they can." And he said, "Have it buried over in the little cemetery, at the back of the old mill property." We came over, took the body, and we brought it over here across from Gilder's Point around onto the point of Big Wafamia there. There was a fishing line wrapped 16 or 17 times. Now, that wasn't tangled up all over. There's a report that these legs were tangled up in the fishing line. That's not so. This was wrapped on us carefully right around. And Roy Dixon asked me if I had a sharp knife. I said I had. He said, "Will you just remove those strings?" And I did, and I counted them. the doctor, Dr. Howell, and the undertakers were, at the time, they were probing to find if there was water in the lungs. There was no water in the lungs. And when we washed his body up, and they made a nice clean job of it, and reduced the swelling so that we could put him into the coffin quite natural. But across the left temple here, there was a mark. It looked as if he'd been struck with the edge of a paddle, just up across the left temple like that. Well, when his body was already embalmed, they used double the amount of embalming fluid, and the undertaker assured me that his body would keep for several weeks or months. We put his body in the coffin, and I went and reported to Mr. Bartlett. He said, place him in the grave. The grave was dug good and deep by the two old guides, about 6 foot 4 inches, I think, in depth. There was a funeral service read. I had my little Anglican prayer book that was given when I was a boy. I got it carried with me. And Mr. Bletcher over here, Senior, read the service from it. And a very nice funeral was held. There were several from the hotel in attendance. About 2 hours after we'd laid him at rest, I received a message that the coroner would arrive at my place. The train would stop and let him off there, and I was to have the witnesses summoned. Well, I got a hustle on and bustled around, and about 10:30 that evening, the train pulled up in front of the ranger's house, and Dr. Rennie got off. Well, he had a cup of tea. He hadn't had anything to eat for some time, and we proceeded down to the little house up here where Tom stopped, Mr. Trainer's house. Mr. Bletcher came over and invited us to go to his place. Dr. Rennie accepted it, and we went over there. The inquest opened. Dr. Rennie never saw his body. All he had to go by was the evidence given at the inquest. Dr. Holland was there and gave his evidence, among others. And almost before we had time, Dr. Rennie said, clearly a case of accidental drowning. Accidental drowning is the verdict. It was no use of trying to say anything. That was settled as far as that was concerned. I went down to the Canoe Lake station in the morning to meet the trains as usual. And here was a steel coffin, all sorted up around the edge. I looked at it. I said, what's the idea? The gentleman down there said, what is so-and-so to you? I showed him my badge. He said, I'm sorry. He said, that's Thompson's body in there. It's being taken to Hometown for burial. I asked him, I said, should you not have reported to the authorities before you touched the grave? I said, that's an official cemetery over there. No, he said, it's not necessary. He said, if I get instructions to remove a body, I do so. I went in to report to the superintendent. He said, now, Mark, we've had enough trouble over that thing. He said, say nothing about it. If they want to take the body, let them take it. Well, he took what passed off for his body anyway. And after he'd gone, the superintendent called me up and said, go down to the cemetery, and if they haven't filled the grave in, fill it in. Close it up, he said. And I went down. Now, in one corner of the grave was a hole about, wouldn't say it would be more than about 20 inches across and down about that depth. Now, any groundhog would make a bigger hole than that. And I've often seen groundhog holes twice as large as that was. Now, perhaps he took it out. God forgive me if I'm wrong about it, but I still think Thompson's body is over there. And I may state right here that I think that Thompson was struck on the head with a paddle by some person that afternoon. I don't think that Thompson died a natural death from drowning. Thank you.